I sat in my home office watching my computer screen in stunned silence as CIO Marcus Wellington's cruel laughter echoed through my headphones. The investor call chat box exploded with confused messages from pension fund managers across the country. My hands shook as I realized what just happened. I was publicly humiliated and terminated during the most important quarterly review call of the year, broadcast live to every major institutional investor I had worked with for the past 6 years. The mute button icon glowed red next to my name. 3 hours before that devastating moment, I had been preparing for what should have been a routine quarterly investor call. My name is Barbara Thompson, and at 32 years old, I had built a solid reputation as a senior fiduciary trustee at Meridian Capital Management. For 6 years, I had been managing $8 billion in pension fund assets for teachers, firefighters, and municipal workers across 12 states. It was work that mattered deeply to me, knowing that my decisions would determine whether a retired teacher could afford her medications or if a firefighter could send his daughter to college. That Wednesday morning started like any other with my usual 5:30 wake-up call and a strong cup of coffee while reviewing overnight market reports. But something felt different as I prepared for the quarterly review. Over the past month, I had been discovering suspicious trading patterns in our Russell Growth Fund that kept me awake at night. The portfolio concentration risks were climbing beyond acceptable levels, and when I had tried to discuss my concerns with Marcus Wellington, our 45-year-old chief investment officer, his response had been dismissive and oddly threatening. Marcus had political connections throughout the state capitol, a fact he never let anyone forget. His corner office was decorated with photographs of himself shaking hands with senators and governors, and he wielded his influence like a weapon against anyone who questioned his methods. During our morning confrontation in his office, he had leaned back in his leather chair and fixed me with a cold stare. "Barbara, I need you to understand something about being a team player," he had said, his voice carrying an edge that made my skin crawl. Sometimes the numbers look scary to people who don't understand the bigger picture. Your job is to manage compliance, not to second-guess investment strategy. I had tried to explain that my fiduciary duties required me to voice concerns about risk management, but Marcus cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Your concerns have been noted and dismissed. Focus on what you're paid to do." The tension in that room was suffocating. Diana Hartwell, our compliance officer and my closest colleague at the firm, had witnessed part of our exchange and later pulled me aside with worry creasing her features. Diana was 41, a brilliant woman who had joined Meridian 2 years after me, and she shared my commitment to protecting our clients' interests. "I don't like how he's treating you," Diana had whispered in the break room. "Something feels wrong about all this pressure to stay quiet." Janet Rodriguez. Our head of human resources had also been acting strangely around me lately. Janet was typically warm and professional, but recently she had avoided eye contact and seemed nervous whenever we crossed paths in the hallway. As someone who prided herself on company loyalty, her behavior suggested something was brewing behind the scenes. Then there was Thomas Chen, one of our portfolio managers, who had been acting increasingly uncomfortable during our team meetings. Thomas usually contributed thoughtful analysis to our discussions, but lately he seemed distracted and unwilling to make eye contact when Marcus spoke about performance metrics. As I prepared my materials for the investor call, I discovered that my access to several critical fund documents had been mysteriously restricted. The quarterly compliance report I had spent weeks preparing was suddenly inaccessible through our internal systems. When I called the IT department, they claimed it was a system upgrade issue that would be resolved soon, but their explanations sounded rehearsed and unconvincing. The pre-call briefing that morning was another red flag. Marcus had made last-minute changes to the presentation agenda, removing my scheduled segment on regulatory compliance updates. When I questioned this decision, he claimed we needed more time for performance-focused discussions, and that my compliance report could be summarized briefly if needed. My growing unease intensified when I realized I had been excluded from the executive preparation session that typically preceded major investor calls. For 6 years, I had been included in every strategic discussion about these presentations, but suddenly I was persona non grata in the inner circle. The technical difficulties that began plaguing my computer seemed suspicious in hindsight. My presentation files kept corrupting, my video conference software experienced mysterious glitches, and my backup systems failed in ways that defied logical explanation. Each problem forced me to spend precious time troubleshooting instead of preparing for the most important call of the quarter. As 9 o'clock approached and investors began logging into the conference, I made a chilling discovery. The quarterly compliance report I had been preparing for weeks had not only been made inaccessible to me, but had apparently been replaced entirely with a different document that I had never seen before. This new report contained conclusions and data that directly contradicted my actual findings about the fund's risk profile. My heart pounded as I realized this was not a series of unfortunate technical problems. Someone had systematically sabotaged my ability to present accurate information to our investors, and I was about to walk into an ambush with no way to defend myself or protect the pension fund beneficiaries who depended on my oversight. The investor call began promptly at 9 o'clock, with 23 institutional investors joining the video conference. These were not casual observers, but serious fiduciary managers responsible for hundreds of billions in retirement assets. Patricia Sanderson from the Teachers' Retirement System of California appeared on screen first, her professional demeanor commanding immediate respect. Robert Hayes from the Chicago Fire Department Pension Fund joined next, followed by Angela Foster, the Investment Committee Chair from the State of Oregon Treasury. As the senior fiduciary trustee, I was scheduled to present our quarterly oversight results early in the agenda. However, when I attempted to begin my presentation, Marcus immediately interrupted with a sharp tone that caught everyone off guard. "Actually, let's focus on performance metrics first," he announced, his smile not reaching his eyes. "We can touch on compliance matters later if time permits." The redirect felt like a slap across the face delivered in front of every important relationship I had built over the years. Several investors exchanged glances on their video feeds, clearly surprised by the abrupt change in protocol. These quarterly calls followed a standard format that everyone had come to expect, and Marcus was breaking established procedure without explanation. When I attempted to interject that fiduciary oversight was legally required to be addressed in these meetings, Marcus's response was even more cutting. "Barbara, I think our investors are more interested in returns than regulatory checkboxes. Perhaps you could let the adults handle the important discussions." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and I watched several investor faces register shock at his unprofessional treatment. Patricia Sanderson's eyebrows rose sharply while Robert Hayes leaned forward in his chair with obvious concern. These were seasoned professionals who had never witnessed such disrespectful behavior during a formal presentation. Marcus continued his systematic undermining with increasingly personal attacks disguised as professional feedback. He questioned my competence with snide comments about my learning curve and suggested that I had been struggling to keep up with the sophisticated strategies the firm employed. Each barb was designed to chip away at my credibility while maintaining plausible deniability. The other executives on the call maintained uncomfortable silence during this character assassination. Thomas Chen stared at his hands, refusing to meet anyone's gaze, while Diana Hartwell's face showed barely contained outrage. Janet Rodriguez appeared to be taking notes, but her expression suggested she was documenting something she found deeply troubling. As the presentation continued, investors began asking pointed questions about regulatory compliance that I should have been addressing. When Patricia Sanderson specifically requested an update on fiduciary oversight metrics, Marcus deflected with vague assurances about maintaining appropriate standards, while preventing me from providing the detailed analysis these professionals deserved. The tension escalated when Angela Foster asked about our risk management protocols for concentrated positions. This was exactly the area where I had identified serious concerns, but when I tried to respond, Marcus spoke over me with dismissive generalizations that bordered on misleading. Our risk management is robust and comprehensive, he claimed, despite knowing that I had documented several troubling trends that required immediate attention. We maintain sophisticated monitoring systems that ensure appropriate diversification. I attempted to screen share the actual risk analysis data that contradicted his statements, but discovered that my sharing permissions had been revoked. The technical sabotage that had been building all morning reached its crescendo during the most critical moment when I needed to protect our investors' interests. Marcus then revealed what he claimed were performance issues with my work that I had never been informed about. He presented fabricated performance evaluations, suggesting I had been underperforming for months, complete with documentation that I had never seen and metrics that bore no resemblance to my actual responsibilities. Unfortunately, we've been concerned about Barbara's attention to detail and her ability to handle the complexity of our current portfolio, he announced to the shocked investors. These concerns have been building over several quarters. The lies were so blatant and well-prepared that I realized this attack had been planned for weeks, possibly months. Every technical glitch, every restricted access, every mysterious system failure had been orchestrated to prevent me from defending myself or presenting accurate information. Robert Hayes looked confused and asked directly, "Are these performance concerns related to her fiduciary oversight responsibilities? Because our due diligence reports have consistently praised her thoroughness and competence." Marcus's response revealed the calculated nature of his ambush. "I think you'll find that our internal assessments are more comprehensive than external observations. We're actually restructuring the fiduciary oversight department to better serve our clients' needs." As the call progressed, I watched my professional reputation being systematically destroyed in front of every important relationship I had spent years building. The investors' growing confusion about the conflicting information was evident in their increasingly pointed questions, but Marcus deflected each inquiry while continuing to undermine my credibility. Patricia Sanderson's expression had shifted from professional interest to barely concealed alarm. She was typing frantically in the chat, her face showing recognition of something significant that others had not yet understood. Her reactions suggested she knew something about my background or qualifications that made Marcus's accusations particularly outrageous. The final blow came when Marcus announced that the company was restructuring the fiduciary oversight department, effective immediately. The timing and public nature of this announcement violated every principle of professional courtesy and legal protocol for personnel decisions, but Marcus seemed confident that his political connections would protect him from any consequences. As I sat there muted and helpless watching 6 years of hard work being destroyed by lies and manipulation, I realized that this was not just about my career. Marcus was willing to jeopardize the financial security of hundreds of thousands of retirees to protect whatever scheme he was running, and I was the only person standing in his way. The moment of my public execution arrived with theatrical precision that Marcus had clearly rehearsed. After systematically undermining my credibility for 30 excruciating minutes, he leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a predator about to deliver the killing blow. Unfortunately, this brings us to a difficult decision that the executive team has reached regarding Barbara's continued employment with Meridian Capital Management, he announced, his voice carrying false regret that fooled no one. The investors on the call shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. This was unprecedented territory. Personnel decisions were never discussed during investor presentations, and the public nature of whatever was coming violated every norm of professional conduct they had experienced in decades of institutional investing. Marcus's calculated cruelty reached its peak as he delivered the words that would haunt me for months afterward. "Barbara, I want to be completely transparent with our valued investors about this situation. It's not us, it's you. Your performance has consistently failed to meet our standards, and we can no longer afford to compromise our clients' interests by maintaining inadequate oversight." The laughter that followed was the most chilling sound I had ever heard in my professional life. It was not the nervous chuckle of someone uncomfortable with an awkward situation, but the deliberate mocking laughter of someone who believed himself untouchable. Marcus was enjoying my humiliation, savoring the power he wielded over my career and reputation. "You're done here, Barbara. Effective immediately." Before I could respond, before I could defend myself or present the evidence of his misconduct that I had been compiling, my microphone was muted. The technical team, clearly operating under Marcus's instructions, cut my access to the call's audio functions. I watched helplessly as my name appeared in the participant list with a red mute icon silencing my voice at the moment when I most desperately needed to speak. The chat box exploded with confused messages from investors who had never witnessed such unprofessional behavior. Patricia Sanderson typed multiple urgent questions, while Robert Hayes demanded clarification about proper termination procedures. Angela Foster's messages expressed concern about the legal implications of firing a fiduciary trustee during a public investor call. Marcus seemed oblivious to the growing concern among the investors, basking in what he believed was his moment of triumph. He had successfully eliminated the person who posed the greatest threat to his schemes, and he clearly expected the institutional investors to accept his narrative without question. But his theatrical performance was revealing more than he intended. The precise timing of the technical sabotage, the fabricated documentation, and the public nature of the termination suggested a level of premeditation that made several investors deeply uncomfortable. These were sophisticated financial professionals who recognized calculated manipulation when they saw it. Other Meridian employees on the call displayed various levels of discomfort with what they were witnessing. Thomas Chen had gone pale and seemed to be fighting nausea as he watched Marcus destroy my career. Diana Hartwell's face showed barely controlled rage, her professional composure straining under the weight of witnessing such blatant injustice. Janet Rodriguez was frantically typing notes, but her expression suggested she was documenting evidence rather than supporting Marcus's actions. As head of human resources, she would have been responsible for ensuring proper termination procedures, and the public nature of my firing clearly violated company policy and potentially state labor laws. The technical team members who had muted my microphone avoided looking at their cameras, their faces showing the discomfort of people forced to participate in something they knew was wrong. Their reluctant compliance with Marcus's instructions revealed the culture of fear he had cultivated throughout the organization. As the minutes ticked by and my voice remained silenced, I realized that this public humiliation was designed to send a message to every other employee who might consider challenging Marcus's authority. He was demonstrating that no one, regardless of their qualifications or legal protections, was safe from his retaliation if they threatened his control. But Marcus had made a critical error in his arrogance. By firing me during a live investor call with institutional fund managers from across the country, he had created witnesses to his misconduct who possessed the knowledge and authority to recognize what they were seeing. These were not passive observers, but active fiduciaries responsible for protecting pension assets worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Patricia Sanderson's frantic typing in the chat suggested she was coordinating with other investors or possibly seeking legal counsel. Her expression had shifted from alarm to determination, indicating that Marcus's public display of power was triggering responses he had not anticipated. The irony of the situation was becoming apparent even as I sat there muted and humiliated. Marcus believed he had eliminated the threat I posed to his operations, but his method of doing so was creating an even larger problem. By destroying my credibility in front of the very people who depended on honest fiduciary oversight, he was undermining the trust that formed the foundation of the entire investor relationship. As the call continued with my name still showing as muted, I began to understand that Marcus's moment of triumph might actually be the beginning of his downfall. The institutional investors on the call were not powerless observers, but sophisticated professionals with the resources and authority to investigate misconduct when they suspected it. Patricia Sanderson's increasingly urgent typing and the growing number of concerned messages in the chat suggested that my public execution was about to trigger consequences that Marcus, in his arrogance, had never anticipated. Exactly 1 hour after my humiliation began, as Marcus attempted to continue the investor presentation, as if nothing unprecedented had occurred, Patricia Sanderson's calm but authoritative voice cut through his monologue like a blade. "Excuse me, Marcus. I need to interrupt for a moment." The tone of her voice commanded immediate attention. Patricia was not making a request. She was asserting authority that Marcus had failed to recognize. Her professional composure was perfect, but there was steel beneath her polished surface that suggested he had made a grave miscalculation. "I'm Patricia Sanderson, and I think there may be some confusion about my role in this relationship. I'm not just representing the Teachers' Retirement System of California. I'm the lead investor on this call, responsible for coordinating $400 billion in pension fund assets across multiple state systems." The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face went from confident smugness to barely concealed panic in the space of a single sentence. $400 billion represented more money than Meridian Capital Management handled for all their clients combined, and Patricia controlled investment decisions that could make or break entire firms. Now I need someone to explain to me why my fund's designated trustee was just fired live on this investor call without any of the proper legal procedures or board oversight that federal fiduciary law requires. Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he processed the implications of what Patricia was saying. His political connections and internal company authority meant nothing to someone who controlled investment flows that could destroy his career with a single decision. Patricia continued with the systematic precision of someone who had dealt with financial misconduct before. "Barbara Thompson holds federal designation as a qualified person under ERISA fiduciary law. Her termination requires specific board procedures and regulatory notification that clearly have not occurred. I need legal counsel to join this call immediately." The chat box erupted with messages from other investors who were beginning to understand the severity of what they had witnessed. Robert Hayes demanded immediate clarification about fiduciary protocol violations, while Angela Foster began coordinating with her legal team in real time. Diana Hartwell seized the moment to provide careful but supportive context. "Patricia is correct about the regulatory requirements. Barbara's role involves federal compliance oversight that cannot be terminated through standard personnel procedures." Marcus's attempts to backtrack were pathetic and revealing. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the desperate floundering of someone who realized he had committed a career-ending mistake in front of the worst possible audience. "I think there may be some misunderstanding about the exact nature of Barbara's responsibilities." He stammered, his voice lacking any of its earlier authority. "Perhaps we could discuss this offline after the call concludes." Patricia's response was swift and uncompromising. "No, Marcus. We're going to discuss this right now with all investors present. Board members need to join this call within the next 10 minutes along with your legal counsel and compliance officers. This is no longer an investment review. This is a fiduciary violation investigation. Thomas Chen looked like he might vomit as he watched Marcus's authority crumble in real time. The systematic intimidation and control that had defined the company culture was disintegrating before everyone's eyes, and Thomas clearly knew more about the underlying misconduct than he had previously admitted. Janet Rodriguez had been frantically messaging someone off-screen, and her expression suggested she was coordinating damage control measures that would protect the company from Marcus's reckless decisions. As head of human resources, she was likely facing her own legal exposure for allowing improper termination procedures. The technical team that had muted my microphone just an hour earlier now scrambled to restore my access, as Patricia specifically demanded my participation in the investigation. The red mute icon next to my name disappeared, and suddenly I could speak again, though my voice shook with emotion as I addressed the investors for the first time since my humiliation began. Thank you, Patricia. I believe there are serious regulatory violations that need immediate investigation, including potential fraud in our risk management reporting and illegal fee structures that could impact pension fund performance. Marcus's face went white as I revealed the scope of what I had discovered. His misconduct was not limited to wrongful termination. It extended to the very heart of the fiduciary relationship with the pension funds whose assets he managed. Patricia's next revelation sent shockwaves through everyone on the call. For context, Barbara was specifically recommended for her position by the SEC itself 2 years ago following her exemplary work exposing fraud at her previous firm. Her termination is not just unprofessional conduct. It's potentially criminal retaliation against a federal whistleblower. The implications of Patricia's statement were staggering. Marcus had not just fired a qualified employee, he had potentially committed a federal crime by retaliating against someone with protected whistleblower status. The political connections he had relied on to shield his misconduct would be worthless against federal investigation. Board members began joining the call in emergency session, their faces showing increasing alarm as they learned about the legal exposure Marcus had created. Chairman Douglas Mitchell appeared on screen with barely controlled fury, realizing that his company faced potential criminal investigation because of Marcus's reckless actions. The tide had completely turned. Marcus, who had wielded absolute authority just hours earlier, now sat powerless as institutional investors worth hundreds of billions demanded answers he could not provide. His public execution of my career had become his own professional suicide, witnessed by every person whose opinion mattered in institutional finance. Patricia coordinated with other investors to establish a unified response that would protect pension fund assets while ensuring proper investigation of potential misconduct. Her authority and resources dwarfed anything Marcus had imagined, and her determination to uncover the truth was relentless. As emergency legal counsel joined the call and began documenting the regulatory violations, I realized that my moment of greatest humiliation had become the catalyst for exposing systematic fraud that could have cost retirees millions of dollars in lost benefits. Marcus's arrogance had been his downfall, and justice was finally within reach. The 48 hours following Patricia Sanderson's intervention transformed from crisis management into systematic justice. Chairman Douglas Mitchell's horrified realization of the legal exposure Marcus had created sparked an emergency board session that began just minutes after the investor call concluded. The boardroom filled with attorneys, compliance officers, and external investigators as the company struggled to contain damage that was spreading like wildfire through the financial community. Marcus's frantic attempts to control the narrative were pathetic and revealing. He had gone from confident predator to desperate prey, In the space of a single conversation with Patricia and his efforts to manipulate board members with promises of increased profits, only deepened his legal exposure. The recorded investor call had become evidence of his misconduct, and every lie he had told was now documented for potential criminal prosecution. Patricia had not wasted time after the call ended. She immediately organized other institutional investors into a coordinated response that leveraged their collective authority over billions in pension assets. Her coordination with Robert Hayes from Chicago and Angela Foster from Oregon created a unified front that could threaten fund withdrawal worth enough money to destroy Meridian Capital Management overnight. The investor revolt was swift and comprehensive. Patricia established a secure communication channel that allowed institutional fund managers to share information and coordinate their response without interference from Marcus or his allies. Within 12 hours, they had documented a pattern of suspicious behavior that extended far beyond my wrongful termination. Media attention began focusing on the scandal as financial reporters caught wind of the unprecedented live firing during an investor call. The story had everything journalists loved: corporate misconduct, pension fund exposure, and a whistleblower retaliation angle that would generate significant public interest. Marcus's reputation was crumbling under scrutiny that intensified with each news cycle. While Marcus scrambled to save his career, I had been methodically preparing my counterattack. The documentation I had been compiling over months of suspicious activity became the foundation for a comprehensive case that exposed systematic fraud. Diana Hartwell provided crucial support by sharing her own observations about Marcus's increasingly erratic demands for regulatory shortcuts. My legal consultation with employment attorney Sarah Williams revealed the full scope of my protected status and the violations Marcus had committed. Sarah specialized in whistleblower retaliation cases and immediately recognized that my situation involved multiple federal laws designed to protect financial industry integrity. Her strategic advice helped me build an ironclad case for wrongful termination while exposing the underlying fraud that motivated Marcus's actions. The evidence that emerged painted a picture of systematic misconduct that went far beyond workplace bullying. Email trails showed Marcus's fabricated performance reviews were part of a broader pattern of deception designed to hide his illegal activities. Financial records proved that my successful oversight had prevented significant losses that would have cost pension beneficiaries millions of dollars. My whistleblower documentation about illegal fee structures became the centerpiece of federal investigation. The Department of Labor and SEC discovered that Marcus had been systematically overcharging pension funds through hidden fees and inflated expense ratios. The money he had stolen was funding a lavish lifestyle that included luxury vacations, expensive cars, and political donations designed to buy protection from oversight. Marcus's desperate measures to silence me included attempted bribery threats against my professional references and manipulation of remaining staff to support his narrative. These actions only deepened his legal exposure while providing additional evidence of his consciousness of guilt. His secret meetings with board members promising unrealistic profit increases revealed the scope of his deception, but the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Diana Hartwell revealed that she had been secretly recording conversations with Marcus for months, following legal advice about documenting potential misconduct. Her recordings included explicit instructions to get rid of Barbara before she ruins everything, and his admission that he had been skimming fees from pension funds. The recordings were devastating. Marcus's own voice provided ironclad evidence of both wrongful termination and financial fraud that no amount of political influence could explain away. His attempts to deny the recordings' authenticity only highlighted his desperation and dishonesty. Thomas Chen's conscience finally overcame his fear, and he provided detailed confession about his coerced participation in Marcus's schemes. Thomas revealed that he had been forced to manipulate portfolio reports to hide excessive risk concentrations that violated fiduciary duty. His testimony provided crucial corroboration for my earlier warnings about dangerous investment practices. The full conspiracy that emerged was staggering in its scope and audacity. Marcus had not only systematically defrauded pension funds, but had created a culture of fear and intimidation that prevented employees from reporting misconduct. His political connections were being investigated for potential corruption as prosecutors examined whether campaign contributions had been made using stolen pension assets. Janet Rodriguez, despite her previous loyalty to company leadership, provided crucial testimony about Marcus's violations of employment law and regulatory procedure. Her documentation of improper termination protocols and intimidation tactics became additional evidence for federal investigators building their case. The board's unanimous vote for Marcus's immediate termination was swift and uncompromising. Board members who had been misled about the company's financial performance and regulatory compliance were furious about the legal exposure his misconduct had created. Their decision to terminate him for cause meant he would forfeit his severance package and benefits while facing potential clawback of previous bonuses. Criminal referrals to federal prosecutors followed quickly as investigators uncovered evidence of mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. Civil lawsuits from defrauded pension funds began piling up as institutional investors sought restitution for stolen assets and damaged investment performance. Professional licensing revocation proceedings would end Marcus's career in financial services permanently. The evidence of his misconduct was so comprehensive that he would never again be allowed to manage other people's money or serve in any fiduciary capacity. The board's emergency decision to not only reinstate me, but promote me to Chief Compliance Officer with full authority to reform company practices was the ultimate reversal of our power dynamic. Marcus, who had tried to destroy my career to hide his crimes, watched from his attorney's office as I was given the authority to clean up the mess he had created. The final indignity came when Marcus was arrested during a live television interview where he had been attempting to blame me for his own crimes. The timing was perfect poetic justice as he was handcuffed while still trying to lie about his innocence. The visual of his arrest became the defining image of corporate accountability that financial media would reference for years to come. The formal reckoning began within 72 hours, as federal agencies launched coordinated investigations that would reshape regulatory oversight throughout the financial industry. The SEC Emergency Investigation Team arrived at Meridian Capital Management, with forensic accountants and criminal investigators who treated our offices like a crime scene because that was essentially what it had become. The Department of Labor's fiduciary duty inquiry focused specifically on Marcus's systematic violations of pension fund protection laws. Their investigators were particularly interested in how he had manipulated reporting mechanisms to hide excessive fees and inappropriate risk concentrations that could have devastated retiree benefits. State Attorney General offices from 12 states joined the investigation due to the exposure of their pension funds to Marcus's fraudulent schemes. The coordination between federal and state authorities created an overwhelming investigative force that no amount of political influence could deter or delay. The FBI White-Collar Crime Unit consultation brought criminal investigators who specialized in financial fraud prosecution. Their involvement signaled that this case had moved beyond civil penalties into potential criminal territory where Marcus could face significant prison time. Financial press coverage of the live firing scandal dominated industry publications for weeks. The unprecedented nature of firing a fiduciary trustee during an investor call captured public imagination while highlighting broader issues of corporate accountability in pension fund management. My strategic interviews with financial journalists allowed me to present facts while building public support for stronger whistleblower protections. Marcus's reputation crumbled under relentless media scrutiny that revealed the full scope of his misconduct. Investigative reporters uncovered his lavish lifestyle funded by stolen pension assets, including vacation homes, luxury vehicles, and expensive artwork that far exceeded his legitimate salary. His political contributions were being examined for potential money laundering violations. The company's stock price plummeted as investors lost confidence in management oversight and regulatory compliance. Institutional shareholders demanded immediate leadership changes and comprehensive reforms to prevent similar misconduct in the future. The financial damage to company value exceeded $50 million within the first week of revelations. Thomas Chen's full confession provided investigators with detailed documentation of the systematic fraud Marcus had orchestrated. His testimony revealed that pressure to manipulate financial reports had been building for over 2 years, with Marcus threatening employees' careers if they refused to participate in illegal activities. The conspiracy extended beyond simple fee theft into sophisticated manipulation of performance metrics designed to hide investment losses. Marcus had been using new investor deposits to pay returns to existing clients, creating a Ponzi-like structure that would have collapsed eventually, wiping out pension benefits for hundreds of thousands of retirees. Evidence of falsified performance reports to regulatory agencies constituted additional federal crimes that carried severe penalties. Marcus had not only stolen money, but had systematically lied to government investigators, whose job was protecting pension fund integrity. My vindication campaign focused on rebuilding trust with institutional investors who needed confidence that their pension assets would be properly managed. The comprehensive evidence I presented to the full board demonstrated not only Marcus's crimes, but also the systematic reforms necessary to prevent future misconduct. Support from institutional investors was overwhelming, as they recognized that my warnings could have prevented massive losses if Marcus had not silenced me. Patricia Sanderson became a powerful advocate for my reinstatement and promotion, using her influence to ensure proper recognition of my professional competence and integrity. Legal representation provided by top employment attorneys specializing in whistleblower cases built a devastating wrongful termination suit that would serve as precedent for future fiduciary protection cases. The evidence was so comprehensive that Marcus's attorneys began discussing settlement rather than risking trial. My strategic media appearances focused on educating the public about fiduciary responsibilities and the importance of protecting whistleblowers who expose financial misconduct. These interviews helped rebuild my professional reputation while advocating for stronger legal protections for employees who report fraud. Marcus's complete downfall accelerated as each revelation triggered new investigations and civil lawsuits. Pension funds from across the country filed claims seeking restitution for stolen assets and investment losses caused by his misconduct. The total potential liability exceeded $200 million, far beyond his ability to pay. The board's emergency appointment of ethical leadership brought in experienced financial executives with impeccable compliance records. Their immediate implementation of comprehensive policy reforms demonstrated the company's commitment to rebuilding trust with institutional investors and regulatory agencies. Full cooperation with all investigations became company policy as new leadership recognized that transparency was essential for survival. The complete reversal from Marcus's culture of secrecy and intimidation helped investigators uncover evidence while beginning the process of organizational healing. Public apologies to pension fund beneficiaries acknowledged the betrayal of trust that Marcus's crimes represented. The company's commitment to restitution and reform helped begin rebuilding relationships with institutional investors, whose confidence was essential for future success. Criminal referrals moved forward as federal prosecutors built cases for fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering charges that could result in decades of prison time. The strength of evidence, including Diana's recordings and comprehensive financial documentation, made conviction highly likely. Civil lawsuits multiplied as pension funds, individual retirees, and company shareholders sought damages for Marcus's misconduct. The legal exposure exceeded the company's insurance coverage, requiring extensive asset liquidation and restructuring to satisfy claims. Professional licensing revocation proceedings concluded with permanent bans that would prevent Marcus from working in financial services ever again. The comprehensive nature of his misconduct made him unemployable in any fiduciary capacity, effectively ending his career permanently. The board's promotion of me to Chief Compliance Officer represented complete vindication and recognition of my professional integrity. The authority to reform company practices gave me the tools necessary to prevent future misconduct while rebuilding institutional trust. Marcus's arrest during his television interview attempting to blame me for his crimes provided the perfect symbol of justice delayed but not denied. His handcuffing while still lying about his innocence became an iconic image of corporate accountability that would be remembered for decades. The reversal of our power dynamic was complete and irreversible. Marcus, who had wielded authority to destroy careers and steal pension assets, now faced criminal prosecution and financial ruin, while I was empowered to clean up his mess and protect the retirees he had betrayed. 6 months after that devastating investor call, I stood at the podium of the National Association of Pension Fund Administrators Conference, looking out at an audience of 800 fiduciary professionals who had come to hear my story. The transformation from humiliated victim to respected advocate had been profound. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that the reforms we had implemented were protecting millions of retirees across the country. My new role as Chief Compliance Officer at Meridian Capital Management had allowed me to completely transform our company culture. The implementation of industry-leading fiduciary protections created new standards that other firms began adopting voluntarily. Our transparent reporting systems and mandatory whistleblower training became models for the entire pension fund management industry. Recognition as a national expert in pension fund oversight had brought speaking opportunities at conferences from California to New York. The expertise I had developed through surviving and exposing Marcus's fraud made me uniquely qualified to help other compliance professionals identify and prevent similar misconduct. My advocacy work was creating lasting improvements in retirement security for working families nationwide. Marcus's federal conviction for fraud and embezzlement had concluded just 2 weeks earlier with a 5-year prison sentence that reflected the severity of his crimes against pension beneficiaries. The judge's comments during sentencing emphasized that stealing from retirees was among the most despicable forms of white-collar crime, as it threatened the financial security of people who had worked their entire lives for modest retirement benefits. His complete professional and personal disgrace was comprehensive and irreversible. The luxury lifestyle funded by stolen pension assets was liquidated to pay restitution, though the amounts he owed far exceeded his ability to pay. His political connections had abandoned him once his crimes became public, and his family had distanced themselves from the scandal that destroyed their social standing. Restitution orders exceeding $12 million would follow Marcus for the rest of his life, ensuring that any future income would go toward compensating the pension funds he had defrauded. The bankruptcy proceedings stripped away his remaining assets, leaving him facing financial ruin that matched his professional destruction. The ripple effects of our scandal had sparked industry-wide reforms that strengthened protection for pension assets throughout the financial sector. Enhanced whistleblower protections now made it easier for compliance professionals to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. The legislation passed in response to our case was unofficially known as the Barbara Thompson Act among pension fund advocates. My advocacy work had expanded beyond individual companies to include testimony before congressional committees considering stronger fiduciary duty requirements. The expertise gained from exposing systematic fraud made me a credible voice for policy reforms that would prevent future misconduct while protecting whistleblowers who reported violations. The mentoring relationships I had developed with other compliance professionals created a network of advocates committed to pension fund integrity. These relationships helped identify potential misconduct before it could damage retiree benefits, while providing support for employees who faced retaliation for reporting violations. Personal growth through surviving corporate betrayal had given me deeper understanding of courage and integrity under pressure. The experience of losing everything and fighting back had strengthened relationships with ethical colleagues while revealing the profound satisfaction that comes from protecting others' financial futures. My stronger partnerships with institutional investors like Patricia Sanderson had created ongoing collaboration that improved pension fund oversight across multiple firms. These relationships provided early warning systems for potential misconduct, while ensuring that fiduciary responsibilities were taken seriously throughout the industry. The profound satisfaction of protecting retirees' financial security had become the driving force behind every decision I made as Chief Compliance Officer. Knowing that teachers, firefighters, and municipal workers could retire with dignity because of our oversight work provided meaning that transcended any individual career achievement. The role in preventing similar abuses industry-wide had expanded my impact far beyond Meridian Capital Management. The consulting work I provided to other firms helped implement the same protective systems that had exposed Marcus's fraud, creating safeguards that protected billions in pension assets. Our transformed company had rebuilt its reputation under ethical leadership that prioritized transparency and regulatory compliance above short-term profits. Record investor confidence reflected institutional trust in our reformed practices, while our performance metrics demonstrated that ethical management actually improved long-term returns. Industry recognition for transparency and governance had positioned us as a model for other pension fund managers seeking to rebuild trust after misconduct scandals. The comprehensive reforms we implemented became templates for regulatory agencies developing new oversight requirements. My team's emergence as an industry model reflected the cultural transformation that ethical leadership could achieve. Former employees who had left during Marcus's reign of intimidation were returning to work for a company that now celebrated integrity rather than punishing it. The final life lessons from this experience centered on the power of standing up to corruption despite personal cost. The courage to challenge authority when pension beneficiaries were being harmed had ultimately protected their financial futures while exposing systematic fraud that could have destroyed retirement security for hundreds of thousands of working families. Truth had ultimately prevailed over deception and bullying, demonstrating that institutional investors with proper authority could hold companies accountable for misconduct. The importance of these oversight relationships could not be overstated, as they provided the only effective check on management power when internal controls failed. The critical role of institutional investors in holding companies accountable had been demonstrated dramatically through Patricia Sanderson's intervention. Her authority over billions in pension assets gave her the leverage necessary to demand justice when internal company mechanisms had been corrupted by misconduct. The deep satisfaction that came from protecting others' financial futures had given my career new meaning and purpose. Every policy we implemented and every safeguard we created was motivated by the knowledge that retirees depended on our integrity for their basic financial security. The peaceful confidence that came from doing the right thing despite tremendous personal cost had been worth every moment of humiliation and uncertainty. The knowledge that we had prevented massive losses for pension beneficiaries while creating lasting improvements in industry oversight provided satisfaction that no amount of money could match. Standing at that conference podium, I looked out at the audience of pension fund professionals and concluded my presentation with words that had become my personal mission statement. When we protect pension assets, we protect the dignity of working families who have sacrificed for decades to earn modest retirement security. That responsibility is sacred, and no amount of intimidation or retaliation should ever prevent us from fulfilling our fiduciary duty to the people who depend on our integrity. Patricia Sanderson, sitting in the front row of the audience, led a standing ovation from the same institutional investors who had witnessed my humiliation 6 months earlier. Now they were celebrating not just my personal vindication, but the systematic improvements in pension fund protection that our struggle had achieved. The applause continued for several minutes as 800 fiduciary professionals recognized that our fight had strengthened protections for millions of retirees across the country. The transformation from victim to victor had been complete, but the real victory belonged to the working families whose retirement security was now better protected because we had found the courage to stand up to corruption. As I looked out at the audience of dedicated professionals committed to protecting pension assets, I realized that Marcus's attempt to destroy my career had instead created a platform for improving retirement security throughout the entire industry. His crimes had been exposed, justice had been served, and the reforms we implemented would protect retirees for generations to come. The satisfaction was profound and lasting. We had not just survived corporate betrayal, we had transformed it into a force for positive change that would protect the financial futures of millions of working families. The price we paid for standing up to corruption had been worth every sacrifice to achieve this outcome. Have you ever had to choose between your career and doing what was right? I would love to hear your thoughts about workplace courage and protecting people who depend on our integrity. Please share your experiences in the comments below. Give this story a like if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming injustice, and share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of standing up for what is right. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to find the courage to protect others when their well-being depends on your integrity and professional dedication.